Sophos is a leader in both hardware and software security solutions, and they offer everything from firewalls to access points to email filtering on down to endpoint protection. And not only do they have all these different security solutions, but they allow you to manage them all in the Sophos Central dashboard. Now, just one of these solutions is Sophos Intercept X Advanced with EDR. Intercept X Advanced with EDR combines endpoint protection with endpoint detection and response. Both of these combined into one solution. So I decided to have a talk with Mike Weaver from Sophos and ask him to do a product demo of Sophos Intercept X Advanced with EDR and show us how it's managed through the Sophos Central dashboard. So Mike, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here. So what I'm going to show you, like you mentioned, is our Sophos Intercept X Advanced with what we call EDR, which stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. And the platform that we use to manage that is what we call our Sophos Central platform. And that's what we're looking at here is what we call our Sophos Central platform. And the reason why it's called a platform is because of all the things I just highlighted here on the left-hand navigation bar. These are all the different components or the different features and different products you can choose to subscribe to from Sophos and manage all this from one pane of glass. Whether it's you're doing your endpoint products, server products, we're always going to go through the endpoint today. We do also have enterprise mobile management. Enterprise mobile management meaning that it's not just cell phones anymore. It's actually managing pretty much any device that a user can carry that runs an Android operating system, an Apple iOS operating system, Mac OS, Windows Mobile, or Windows. Those all can be devices that we manage from an enterprise mobile perspective. And we can also make it easy for you to store all your encryption keys if you're using the embedded encryption products from Microsoft with BitLocker and File Vault for Mac products. Just a quick, nice, easy place for you to store all your encryption keys and also giving like a self-help portal. So if somebody does forget their encryption password, they can go through the process to recover that themselves. We also can do cloud-based wireless management. So you can use Sophos wireless access points and manage them through the cloud. So you don't even have to have a firewall. You just have to have an internet connection to the internet, and you can plug directly into the access point and then manage it and provide internet access through our Sophos Central platform. We also have an email gateway. So this gives you the opportunity to provide a full anti-spam solution with some of the latest and greatest features, like being able to do email encryption for compliancy, being able to do things like time of click URL protection to protect you from getting spam emails with bad links in them, as well as even up to VIP management. So we see a lot of times these days where hackers are spoofing CXO level people within an organization and getting people to do things like send money and stuff like that. And then Sophos, while we're going to talk about endpoint today, Sophos is also a full firewall company, so that we have a complete line of firewalls that all can be managed through the Sophos Central platform as well. And then Phish Threat is a training enablement tool that allows you to phish your own internal employees to help see who falls susceptible to those different types of phishing attacks, like credential harvesting attacks. You're trying to get credential information. Whether you're sending attachments in emails and they just go to open the attachment not really knowing what it is, or just clicking on links inside of an email, as an example. So Phish Threat is a training enablement tool that allows you to phish your own internal employees, and if they quote unquote fail, then there's remediation modules as part of that also help you to then teach them how not to do that bad behavior. That's why we call it a Sophos Central platform. And once again, you choose which products you want to use from Sophos and which ones you want to subscribe to. So it's not a one giant size price, one size fits all type thing. We do give you the flexibility that you can choose the different components that you would like to use from Sophos. That's why we call it a Sophos Central platform. And with that, just a couple things about what's on the screen. So on the right-hand side of the screen, we have what we call the Sophos Central dashboard. So with all the different components, whether I go into endpoint or encryption, email gateway, so we're always presenting you with a dashboard, which gives me the most relevant information of what's going on inside of my system for the things that I'm subscribed to. And being at the top level here, this shows me everything that alerts and things that are relevant of everything I'm subscribed to. In this case, because this is my demo account, I'm subscribed to everything. That's why you see so many things here like device and user summaries, where I can see servers, I can see mobile device, I can see users, I can see different devices. And as we go into endpoint protection, you'll see how this screen will change, and it's more relevant. The dashboard is more relevant to each one of the features as I go into them. Okay. So with that said, usually what I used to like to start out with is first, I like to talk with people on how easy it is to get people into the system and how easy it is to deploy out our endpoint product. And then we'll take and actually jump into the endpoint protection side and take a look at the actual policies, how we create policies, and just the different features and components that are part of our Intercept X Advanced with EDR. So with that said, I'm gonna click on people on the left-hand navigation bar. So there's a couple different ways we can get users into the system here. And you can see here that I have users and I have organizational groups. So we support both. And from a policy perspective, we're able to assign policies to users, organizational groups, or a combination of both. And we'll see that in just a few moments. But as we go to get people into the system, you can see here that we actually have an Active Directory sync. And when you use the word sync, I usually like to clarify here that it's just a one-way feed. We don't actually write anything to your Active Directory, but it's a way to help get users and organizational groups within the system. And the nice thing about this is that you pick and choose within your OU tree structure which organizational groups and which users you want to bring over. If that's not something you have available or don't want to do that integration, we can obviously manually add a user, simply clicking on Add User. But we can also import a list from a CSV file. And as I click on that, you'll see that we even give you the option to download a blank template with header information, as well as a template with some example data. So another quick, easy way to get users into the system. And once we have them added into the system, and also based on whether it's individual users and or organizational groups, next thing we want to do is we want to then actually push out protection for the devices. Now, obviously, I can download the complete installer like you see here, or I can choose the different components that I want to choose to download as part of my installer. But how you actually push out the endpoint to users today, I have this little down arrow here. It says how to use these installers for endpoint and servers. And then you'll see here that it says learn more. So if I click here, it actually takes me out to a knowledge base article, which then walks me through all the different ways in which we can deploy out our endpoint product to the user population. So whether you want to set up an email link, if you want to set up an installer link, if you want to use a scripted install, if you want to make it part of a ghost or gold image. So however you typically deploy out software applications today, that's what Sophos supports as far as pushing out our product. So once again, however you typically deploy out software applications today, whether it's through scripted installs, download the installer, put on a server, point people to it, send them an email link, whatever is most convenient for you. And like I said, however you typically support deploying out software applications today, that's what we support. Okay. All right. So with that, I'm going to transition over to, I'm going to click on Endpoint on the left-hand navigation bar. So let's actually go into and let's start talking about endpoint protection itself. So as I mentioned before, we always present a dashboard. And with this dashboard, this one I noticed that I don't have as many icons here because it's now more relevant to just endpoint protection. And that information that I see here for alerts and threat cases and stuff, this is all relevant to just endpoint. Okay. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on policies, because policies is what actually drives or sets up how I want my endpoint product to work on a device. Now, we have quite a few different components, and we'll actually talk about these different components. But what I wanted to draw your attention to first is, as an example, on my threat protection policy, notice that I only have one policy. I just use my base policy. But for some of my other ones, like my peripheral control and my data loss prevention policies, notice I have 3 policies for this one, 2 policies for that one. And the reason why I wanted to point that out is because this system is completely customizable based on whatever your security needs are, based off your business needs. So it's not a one size fits all. It's not one policy and everybody adheres to it. We're able to create multiple different policies based on whatever somebody's need is, based off their maybe their job role, as an example. So the first thing I'm going to click on Add Policy in the upper right-hand portion of the screen. And the first one we're going to talk about is the threat protection policy, because that's the most important policy, because that's how we're going to tell it how the scanning engine, how to perform and which scanning engines we want to use. Now on this screen, you can see that I actually have the option to create policies based off of users, or I can create policies based off device. So the difference here is a user policy follows that user no matter what device they're on, based on them logging in. So once they authenticate and they log in, as long as there's a Sophos endpoint agent installed on that device, then based off of their credentials, whatever policies that you've created for that user follows them. It doesn't matter which device they're using. Whereas if you have a device that you maybe it's a kiosk in a lobby, or it's a shared device, maybe in a warehouse. So instead of having different policies based off of a user, you can have what we call a device policy. So it doesn't matter who's logged into that device, that policy on that device will hear who, no matter who's actually logged into that device. Okay, so for a threat protection policy, once I click continue, the first thing it's going to ask me is, okay, well, who do I want to assign this policy to? You can see here that I have a list of users, so I can click some of my users. And then I can also click on organizational groups. So we're very flexible in that you have the option of assigning a policy to organizational groups or individual users, or as you can see here, a combination of both. So it's not one or the other. You can obviously do users, groups, or a combination of both. Okay. Now that we've decided who we're going to assign the policy to, let's click on settings and talk about the different types of settings we have. Now, for threat protection policies and threat protection policies only, notice how everything is grayed out here. And the reason for that is because over the years, we've gotten so many requests and people calling into support saying, hey, how do I know that my protection engine or my threat protection policy is set to the optimal level of protection to make sure I'm fully protected? Well, about 3 or 4 years ago, we actually added this feature in here that says use recommended settings. Now, every threat protection policy you create will always start out this way, meaning that it will always start out with use recommended settings checked. But having this checkbox here means that all the other settings below are already set for the optimal level of protection. Now, I can easily uncheck this checkbox, and now I can make changes to anything that I see here, okay? All right, so as we start to talk about threat protection policy, the first two things we're going to talk about here are the different ways or the different types of scanning engines that are available to you through the Sophos Intercept X Advanced with EDR product. So first off, live protection, where we're actually going to go out and look at from Sophos Labs to see if there's any updates stating to any types of signatures. And when we talk about signatures, that's like the original way in which scanning was done. When antivirus products and anti-malware products were first released way back when, that's how they actually started out. When some sort of vulnerability or virus was released out into the wild, and by the way, the day in which a new vulnerability is released out into the wild, that's referred to in the industry as a 0 day. So it's important to understand what 0 day is and being able to know whether, what products can help protect you against what we call 0 day threats. So once again, a 0 day threat is a new vulnerability, a new threat that has just been released today that's never been seen in the wild. So with signature-based scanning, how signature-based scanning works is once there's a new vulnerability that's released out into the wild, each individual security vendor will get a copy of that vulnerability. And once they have a copy of that vulnerability, now they can write a signature that tells their scanning engine how to recognize that vulnerability and how to eradicate it, okay? So with signature-based scanning, some of the advantages and minuses of signature-based scanning is, first off, with signature-based scanning, because either it's matching a signature or it's not. So with that, we have a low amount of what we call false positive. And once again, a false positive is marking something bad that's really good, right? So we want to have a very low amount of false positives. So with signature-based scanning, because either whatever I'm scanning either matches the signature I have or it doesn't, so I have a very low amount of false positives. However, the one downside to signature-based scanning is that, remember how I just mentioned how we actually get a signature? We have to first get a copy of that vulnerability that's been released, get a copy of that vulnerability so we can write a signature that tells our scanning engine how to recognize that vulnerability and how to get rid of it. So the downside to signature-based scanning is that there is that moment in time when a 0-day vulnerability, if you're only relying on signature-based scanning, you're not protected against 0-day vulnerabilities. You're still protected, you're just not protected against those brand new vulnerabilities. So how do we combat that? That's where we start looking at the other types of scanning engines that are available out in the market space, which are scanning engines like behavioral based, which means that, based off of, over time, we've seen how certain types of vulnerabilities act. So we can also have a behavioral based scanning engine that says, once some sort of execution has happened, we can say, hey, we recognize this. This looks like a vulnerability. Based off its behavior, we're going to treat it like a vulnerability. Now, doing that could give us a little bit higher false positive, but we are protecting against some of those 0-day vulnerabilities. Another key thing you hear in the industry today now is machine learning. And with machine learning, that's where you have an artificial intelligence engine that is, based off a base set of instructions that you've given that scanning engine of how to look for vulnerabilities. And this also is another nice way to help combat against those 0-day vulnerabilities. So with deep learning, that's what Sophos refers to as our machine learning platform. And so machine learning is a way to help to combat against those 0-day threats. All right, so as we move down and we talk about some of the other features, real-time scanning, obviously anytime somebody's accessing a file on their local drives, so like drive C, drive D, local letters. So while they're accessing a file, so accessing a file means either a read or a write is taking place. And we also do that on network shares, so that as they're accessing a file on a network share with this checkbox checked here, that means as they do a read or write on a file on a network share, we're going to scan that. Now, usually the next thing people ask me is, well, what about when I'm doing my scheduled scans like you see down here? Well, when I'm doing a scheduled scans do not include mapped network drives. Because think about that. If I had 100 people all mapped to the same network drive, and that scheduled scan kicks off, and now I have 100 people scanning my network drive, that shared drive, that could bring that server down. That's why you would put server protection on that server specifically, but still on file access, meaning that somebody's either reading a file or writing a file from one of these, from the local drive or a network shared drive, we're still going to look at that to make sure that it's a good file and that it's clean. Not only are we going to look at files locally and network shares, but anytime your users actually out to the internet. So anytime there's any sort of download in progress, if they click to, whether intentionally or unintentionally click to go to a website. So this is different from what we call web content filtering, which we're going to talk about in just a few moments. This is just a list that Sophos keeps of known malicious websites, so that it's, like I said, if somebody intentionally or unintentionally clicked on something somewhere and went to one of those sites, we're going to help block that. Now, this next feature I really like a lot. This feature is designed to really help people understand or to know when some sort of file transfer is taking place. And what I mean by that is, hackers look for a lot of websites that don't have all the necessary protection on them they should have. And when they find one that doesn't have all the necessary protection mechanisms in place, they'll actually embed their information inside that website, so that as people click around and do things, now they have an opportunity to execute their malicious stuff. And what really happens here is, whether somebody clicked on something to download, or if it was a compromised website that automatically starts pushing something down to your device without you knowing it, what's going to happen is, as soon as we see a file transfer from the internet taking place, a downloads in progress, we're actually going to look at that and we're going to make sure and see how it says action to take on low reputation downloads. The option is either prompt user or log only. When I have the checkbox to use recommended settings, it's always going to prompt the user. And I have a screenshot of what this looks like. So here you can see that I use H&R Block to do my taxes. And what happens here, I just throw it in an email just so I could have a place to put it. But when I was on that page and I went to download the software, what we actually do is to make sure there's no question that somebody sees this dialog box. Whatever web page they're on, we actually clear the web page. We throw up this warning that shows them, hey, you're about to download something. And basically, we give them the option. If you weren't expecting this, you can return to the previous page. So we'll stop that download and we'll return to the previous page. If it's something that they were expecting to do, they were expecting that to happen, that download, then yes, they can click to proceed here. And anytime there's a click proceed in our system, we always do track that and keep that for reporting purposes. But what I really like about this is that if this warning pops up and it's not something you were expecting, you have the option to now to go back to the previous page to keep that malicious file from coming if that's not something you were expecting. Or if it was something you were expecting, you can click to proceed. So that's this feature here, and I really like it a lot because it really makes the users cognizant of when file transfers are taking place. Now, the next couple of things we're going to talk about is we'll really start getting into the meat of some of the advanced features we have with our Intercept X with EDR product. Now, one of those features that we have is designed to specifically help protect against ransomware. Now, obviously, Sophos is not the only company that can help protect against ransomware attacks. But what I always tell people to do is when you're talking to your various different endpoint vendors and you're comparing them, when you start talking specifically about ransomware, since we all know that's one of the biggest types of vulnerabilities we see these days, and the ransomware, as we all know, once you get hit with a ransomware attack, it starts encrypting all your files on all your devices and holds your ransom for you to pay that ransom for them to unlock then all your data. So what I always tell people to do is as you're evaluating different products, the thing I always like people to make sure they understand is when you're looking for a ransomware company to help protect you against ransomware, what I always tell people to do is understand what it takes for you to become whole again if you get attacked with ransomware. Because with ransomware, once a ransomware attack starts, obviously it is encrypting some of your files. So once that ransomware attack has been identified and it's been stopped, the question is, what does it take to make you whole again? How do you get those files that are encrypted? How do you get them back again? Well, that's what this whole feature that I just highlighted here called CryptoGuard, its whole job. What it does is the device it's sitting on, it monitors for encryption requests. And any encryption request that it sees, it will actually now, when it sees that encryption request, it will actually make a backup of that file at the time of encryption request. And just so we're all on the same page here, we're not a backup company. We're not backing up your whole entire hard drive. We're only backing up files that are being requested to be encrypted. Now, while CryptoGuard is backing up those files that are being requested to be encrypted, the scanning engines are doing their job to look at, hey, is this a valid encryption request? Meaning, is this coming from a valid encryption product? So there are valid encryption products out there. Perfect example, Sophos has a product called Sophos Safeguard. It's a whole disk and file level encryption product. And that's a valid encryption product. It's also doing things like checking to see, well, what types of files are being requested to be encrypted? Because valid encryption products are only going to encrypt your data files, right? They're not going to encrypt your program files, DLL files, things of that nature. Because if it did, how would you be able to use your application? So while all that's taking place and the scanning engines are evaluating that request as well, if it just makes a determination as, hey, this is a ransomware attack, let me kill this process. So when it kills that process, what the scanning engines then do is then it tells CryptoGuard, hey, anything that you just encrypted by this process, roll those files back. So we actually make a copy of the files that are being requested, and then we automatically roll them back for you. And that's why I was saying, make sure you understand that whatever ransomware company you look at for protection, ask them up front, what does it take to make me whole again? Once you stop that ransomware attack, do I need to pull out my backup systems now? Or some out in the market rely on Windows shadow copy, which means then one, you're relying on Windows shadow copy. Windows shadow copy can be turned off by anybody that has access to that device. So they can potentially turn off your restore features there. Plus, that means it's only for Windows. So with our product, it works with Windows, works for Mac. So it helps protect you from ransomware attack. Once again, always ask that question to your vendor, what does it take to make you whole again? And for us with CryptoGuard, it's an automatic process for you. Now, once we detect anything, the next thing we're going to do is we have what we call Sophos Clean. Sophos Clean is going to clean up any remnant of any sort of vulnerability or any attack that we just saw that just took place. And then we're going to create what we call a threat case. Now, threat case is really important because to me, that's the most important part of our whole endpoint product is being able to show exactly what happened. And to show you what that looks like, I'm going to take a step back for a second. I'm going to come over to what we call our Threat Analysis Center. And on our Threat Analysis Center, this is going to show me all the different threat cases that I've seen. I'm just going to click on one of them here, and it gives me a nice little, who, what, when, where, and why across the top. The device, the IP address that it happened, where the root cause was. In this case, it was an Outlook. We found it in Outlook, detected and cleaned it. And as part of this, we also give you a summary. So the detection, the type of vulnerability is called lockdown. And notice that it's an active link. So I can actually click right here and it takes me out to Sophos Labs. And at Sophos Labs, it gives me more relevant information on what that particular vulnerability is about. Once again, tells me it is an Outlook, which device it happened on, who it belongs to, when it happened. And then I get a couple extra items over here on the right-hand side. So I can choose to isolate this device. Now, remember, what this threat case is showing me is that what happened along the way that it was detected and it was cleaned up. But maybe I wanted to further investigate this. So I can click to isolate this device, which now puts that device in an isolated mode, which means it doesn't have access to do anything except for connect out to the internet and go to Sophos Central, this platform only for remediation. I can click right from here to scan the device. I can also run a live discovery query on it. We're going to talk about what live discovery is in just a moment. But as I scroll down, here's what I find very powerful about our threat cases. This is the forensics of what happened from start to finish. So this is the attack chain. This is actually what happened. And if I want to look at things specifically, like maybe I want to look at just registry keys, I can uncheck these other boxes. And now it shows me just registry key entries. And any of these that I click on, here in this case, it was 365 registry key accesses. You can see them all listed. So I can look to see what was actually touched. If I had any files that were actually caught, I can look at more information about that files. I click on it. It'll give us the threat, what we call the threat intelligence from the Sophos Labs of whether this file is any good, whether it's bad, what we see about it. In this case, because it's Adobe Acrobat here, that's why you see the status of good, to have a known good reputation. But the forensics to me is very powerful because it shows you exactly what happened as part of this vulnerability. And here, as I click on case record, so so as soon as this happened, so this day, it happened on August 25th, so it created a case. And I actually clicked on scan the device. So that's what added this entry here. And these other few things that I have here, what's happening box, here's where I can type in whatever I am doing as part of this threat case. So if I ever have to divulge to anybody that, hey, I had this particular attack on my system, and as I click to add to comment, now I can add as many comments to everything that I've done as part of this case record to show, first of all, the case was created, whether I scanned the device. Here I wrote, I want to rescan in 2 weeks. So just whatever I want to do as part of that case record, it does give me detailed information, so it makes it easy for when I'm showing something to somebody else. But I can also scroll down and I can see everything was part of this particular attack chain. So you can see here it says 1 of 10 of 604, and I can actually take a snapshot of this forensic details up here. as well as I can export to CSV all these things that we see down here so that I can keep it for longer retention periods. Now, that's what a threat case looks like. Now, as part of what we call our EDR, endpoint detection and response, that is a couple extra features we have here on the left-hand navigation bar. So when you think about endpoint protection, we're traditionally thinking about, endpoint protection is more of a reactive product, right? So I have this agent sitting on a device and it's waiting for something to happen. And once it does, whether some sort of vulnerability gets on that device, tries to execute, that's where the endpoint's going to actually stop that from happening. And that's reactive. Where endpoint detection and response, or EDR, allows me to be more proactive. So with endpoint detection and response, we have a couple different things here. We can do threat searches. So with threat searches, I can put in one or more file names, SHA-256 file hashes, IP addresses, domains, or command line. And where that becomes powerful, as an example, as we come back over here, this threat case we were looking at just a few moments ago, you notice that right here it says 21 IP connections. So as I click here, I can actually highlight these IP addresses. I'm just going to highlight a few of them here. And now when we come over to the threat searches, I can now paste these IP addresses in here. And when I click search, and I know nothing's going to come up because it's a small demo environment that I have, I know that none of my other devices have actually reached out. But if I can now search my whole entire environment to see if any of my other endpoints have reached out to any of those same IP addresses, and if so, I could choose to, click any of the next to the device name, click any of the checkboxes next to the device name, and I can choose to then isolate that device, as well as then I can choose to also do what we call clean and block, or block and clean, so that now if anybody else comes up to the same IP addresses when we do block and clean, now by saying block, it's going to add it to the block list, and then it's going to clean up any device that I've listed here. But some other things that I can do as part of our endpoint detection and response is we have what we call live discover, where I can now query through just normal general SQL commands, SQL queries. I can search across my entire platform. I can actually now do more proactive things like threat hunting. So I have a couple of devices that I have selected, and you can see here that we have a lot of different pre-canned SQL queries, as well as you can just create your own. As long as you're familiar with SQL, you can click and create your own queries. You don't have to use our pre-canned ones. But for those that aren't, like, I'm not a huge SQL person. I mean, I understand it, but I haven't been an avid programmer in it. But just to give you an idea of some of the things, as I click here, I just clicked on the device one, and so here's where I can now see things like, the hardware and operating system details of a device. I can also see, what drives they have. I can do things like check to see what network connections are open. Do I have any RDP sessions open? So there's lots of things I can do. And let's click on this one as an example. And you can see right here that it does give me a SQL query command. I can choose to edit it. And once I edit it, I can save it. But as I click to run the query, it's now going to go out against those two devices that I had. And it's now going to run this query and come back and give me the results. And so in this case, you can see the different devices that I have, the host name, the CPU brand that it's using, type, how much physical memory it has, who the hardware vendor is, type of machine, all the way down to even the operating system. So this one has Windows 10 Pro, this one has Windows 10 Home, which version they're currently running. So at least looks like both of them are up to date. But it gives me that detail of information. And that's just one of the queries of that I picked of hardware and operating system details. But as I go back to my categories, so I can see compliance, network. So as an example, which, if I was to run it, which, network interface details. So it gives me the network interface details, any processes with open network connections. So if I was to click and run this one, it's now going to query those devices, and it's going to now look to see for all the processes that I have running on those different devices, the processes that are running that have a network connection and what port it's using, as well as what is the remote IP address that it's connecting out to. So this makes it very powerful for you to now to be proactive and to actively search your network and do active threat hunting inside of your system. So that's the power, some of the power that you have with our EDR product. Now, also on top of that, so let's say this particular product. So I'm going to click on the device name, which is going to take me over to devices. And here I can do quite a few different things. So I can choose to isolate the device right from here by simply clicking on isolate. And I also have this live response. So if I need to connect to a device to maybe issue some commands or do something to help remediate that device, when I click on live response, let me just type in a few characters here. And so now what I'm doing is I'm establishing connection. While I was doing that, I'm just going to click back over to the screen and notice that my IP address here. So notice that I'm using a 192.168.168.65 on that device. So once it finishes doing that connection, and now you can see here, I'm now connected over to that device. It gives me a DOS prompt. And now any command that I can issue from a DOS prompt, I can actually do from here. So as an example, do ipconfig just to show the IP address. And you can see here that this is that device that I was talking about, because here it is showing that it's using that 192.168.168.65 IP address. Well, but let's say that, you know, after this attack or something happened here, maybe I want to restart that device. So just type, you know, anything I can do from a DOS prompt. So do a shutdown/R for restart. And now once I hit enter, now that device will actually reboot. So any command that I can do, clear network cache, do trace route, you know, just anything that I can do from a command line, I can now do that within this device remotely. So that's one of the cool features that we have as part of that, is being able to actually do a live connection over to that device to help with any remediation or anything else that I need to do there. Okay. So with that said, that is the biggest bulk of features with what we call our Intercept X Advanced with EDR. I'm now going to click on Endpoint Protection and come over and let's just wrap up and finish up with the other different types of policies that we briefly have. So another type of policy that we have is the ability to do what we call peripheral control. So now I can control the peripherals that are connecting to that device. As I click on settings, I can click over here and now you can see, you know, I can control Bluetooth devices, I control what wireless networks, I can control, you know, secure removable storage or optical drives or other removable storage. And I can say whether I'll make it read only, or I can block it. And I can also add exemptions. So anytime with somebody plugs a peripheral into any device that have our endpoint agent on, if I was to click, now anything that somebody plugs in, we automatically register. So even if I'm blocking it, so as an example, removable storage, if I was to block removable storage, it would still show up here because maybe if somebody wants to try and use that, instead of me trying to figure out their device, all you have to do is tell me that, you know, I can look at that person's name, as well as they tell me, oh, I'm using a Luxar USB device. I can look for that. And now I can come in here and now I can create an exception if I wanted to. And I can create an exception based off of a model type or the actual instance ID or the serial number of that device, if you will. So you can see here, I can do a model or instant type. In this case, I can say allow, or I can say read only, which means they only have the ability to read that device. They can't write to it. Okay, so that's peripheral control. Another feature that we have is the ability to do what we call application control. Now, application control and web control and DLP, the three things I'm going to show next, that's typically what you see in a firewall. Just like with Sophos firewalls, we have application control and web control in our device, in our firewalls. But what happens when that person leaves your network environment, especially with the COVID pandemic that's going on these days? You have a lot of people working from home. So once they leave that network environment and they're no longer sitting behind your firewall, how do you now control those applications that they're using? Well, because this is part of the agent, this now follows them no matter where they go. So now you're able to enforce application control and what websites they can view, even though they're not sitting behind your firewall anymore. So you can see here we have quite a few different categories. And for demo purposes, I always like to use internet browsers, because when people think of internet browsers, they think of the big five. They think of Microsoft Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, Firefox, Chrome, and Safari. But you can see that we actually are able to detect 96 different browsers. And let's say that you as a company had decided that you wanted to settle on Google Chrome. So by putting a checkbox there, and let me scroll down to Google Chrome, unchecking Google Chrome, now if I apply this policy to somebody, the only browser they would be allowed to use on their device would be Google Chrome. And as we detect more and more browsers, by putting a checkbox in here, from an administrative perspective, this makes it easy for you. What this checkbox says is, hey, anything that's new that's added to this category, automatically block it. So I don't have to keep coming in to see if there's something else we're now seeing, and now putting a checkbox to block it. But you can see as I scroll down, there's quite a few different categories. Another very popular one is online storage. You have the ability to control the applications that people can use. In addition to applications, I have the same functionality or features available to me for web control. So with web control, I can now determine, what types of websites that I'll allow people to use. And you can see that we've made it very easy to be as simple as you want it to be, or as you can see, I can scroll down or click in these down arrows. So here's a policy for acceptable web usage. Whether I want to keep it clean, meaning, don't allow pornography and things like that, or questionable material. Conserve bandwidth, so anything with, it has to do with streaming, we can control that here. But everywhere you see, let me specify, this is where I can now drill down and go down another layer to now be able to control at a deeper level. So like I said, it can be as easy as you want, or it can be as granular as you want it to be. So I can say allow warn here, once again, warn, which means that it's going to come up and basically say, hey, is this a website you should be viewing? And you can click to proceed. Anytime you click to proceed, we're going to capture that, block it, or once again, let me specify. It just means you keep drilling down and you get that. So that's what I'm saying. It can be as easy as you want it to be, as high level, or as granular as you want it to be, and keep going down further and further as far as being more specific to the web pages allowed to use. So that's all the different types of policies that we have, and that's our endpoint protection with our EDR, and being all managed by one central platform called our Sophos Central platform, managing not only our endpoint, but can also do server, and then all the other features we mentioned earlier. Appreciate your time. That is a demo on our Intercept X Advanced with EDR. Mike, appreciate you having me. Any questions?
Thank you, Mike. Now, if any of you guys do have questions about Sophos Intercept X Advanced with EDR, feel free to type those questions up in the comments section below, or contact Corporate Armor. Our security experts can answer any questions that you might have about Sophos Intercept X Advanced EDR, or really any other Sophos solution.